Hello friends, and welcome back to the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature's podcast, Conversations with Mother Nature, a space in which we will discuss the growing global movement that is the rights of nature. Today we will dive into a momentous issue that is reshaping our relationship with the world around us, the shift in perspective from Anthropocentrism to Biocentrism, and the fundamental role of the rights of nature in this transformation. We are pleased to have with us two notable experts, Miriam and Larrea, who will share their deep knowledge on this crucial topic. Together, we will explore how this revolution in our way of thinking is redefining how we interact with nature and how it may be the key to mitigating the environmental crisis we are facing. Carlos Larrea is a prestigious economist and academic and a research professor at the Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar in Quito, Ecuador. He was a technical advisor to Ecuador's Yasuni initiative, has been a consultant to several international organizations, and has published several books and articles on the social environmental aspects of development in Ecuador and Latin America. Miriam is Professor of Environment and Sustainability at the Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar, Ecuador. Since 2020, she coordinates the Master in Political Ecology and Alternatives to Development. She holds a PhD in sociology and a master's degree in Latin American studies from the Free University of Berlin. Her research focuses on the critique of development, systemic alternatives, and the territorial implementation of Buen Vivir, and combines decolonial and feminist perspectives with political economy and political ecology. Carlos and Miriam, welcome to our podcast.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Miriam. It's nice to see you again. This morning, we are going to have a very interesting discussion about the Anthropocene, about Anthropocentrism and Biocentrism as a paradigmatic alternative. So I would like to begin asking you if you can please explain us in more detail the concept of anthropocentrism and how this notion have influenced the relationship between human beings and nature, particularly after the Industrial Revolution.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Well, to attend your question, I would say anthropocentrism is a worldview in which human beings are the central or the most significant entities in the world. It is also a basic belief that is embedded in many Western religions and philosophies, and also in Christian religions, which prevail in the Western world, as we all know. So we can find proof of this, for example, in the Genesis in the Bible, where it says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And a little bit later, the Bible says, "Be fruitful and increase in number." It says that to the human beings, right? "Fill the earth and subdue it." So there is a problem with that notion of subduing the earth, I think. And this is the grounds of anthropocentrism, which regards humans as separate from nature and as superior to nature. So, of course, that doesn't englobe every strand of Western thinking, but it is in the roots of Western thinking, which holds that human life has intrinsic value, while other entities, for example, animals, plants, whatever places, landscapes, are only resources that may justifiably be exploited for the benefit of humankind. And in its extreme variants, anthropocentrism would even claim that humans can do whatever they want to nature and to the planet. And so this dual separation of humans and natures is also mirrored within man himself. by the separation between mind and body, between reason and emotion, in those deep roots of Western thinking. It is very important to note that this separation is always hierarchical, so it establishes a superior part and an inferior part, and this is what has shaped the kind of nature relations our Western societies have engaged in a profound way. And it's also mirrored in the patriarchal separation of men and women, in the supposition that women are somehow closer to nature, so they are inferior. And also, our founding myth, again in the Bible, says that women were made out of the rib of a man. So there is also no equality here. And this has shaped very much, the logic of considering nature as a resource which can be processed, which can be exploited, which can be destroyed, as long as it is beneficial to those who do that. I would stay here. And I would like to ask you a question in return, Carlos. Because there is, in the last decades, a term going around which is rather contiguous or similar to that of anthropocentrism. It is the Anthropocene. And I would like to ask you to explain in more detail what that means and how the Anthropocene marks a significant change in the history of the Earth.
Well, what is the meaning of the Anthropocene? Well, it is a scientific concept based on geology. As you know, humankind is very new in our planet. We are only 200,000 years old as a species. However, the planet has 4,500 million years. Yeah, and geology divides the natural history of Earth in very long periods of time, in which we have a particular set of geological traits and biological traits, mostly. But there is a lot of geological eras. I would like to refer to two or three, which are very important to understand the notion of Anthropocene. The Pleistocene is a period in which we have a lot of glaciations. An interglacial period. It lasted about 2.5 million years, and it ended very recently, about 10,000 years ago. Yeah, we have a very unstable climate, and human beings evolved just at the end of the Pleistocene. And then we have the Holocene. The Holocene is the current period, and it has a very important trait in which climate became stable. And secondly, human beings were evolved so that in a stable climate, we have two very important cultural changes. First, the development of agriculture, which allow it to begin civilization as we understand that. And secondly, the evolution of the current history, and particularly the evolution of science and technology, which led finally to the Industrial Revolution. Yes. Well, what happened now? That the impact of human economy and human society on Earth, it became very big. Human population exploded, human economic activity exploded. We have an exponential growth also on the pollution and destruction and residuals that human beings are throwing to Earth, particularly the contamination of atmosphere with greenhouse gases and so on. As a result, one particular species, our species, human beings, Homo sapiens, are changing the face of planet in a probably very difficult to reverse process destroying stability, particularly destroying climate stability. A group of scientists at the University of Stockholm developed the notion of planetary boundaries, which is a measure of the resilience capacity of Earth to support this kind of changes. And they defined nine very significant environmental global problems. And human activity already surpasses six of the nine boundaries. So we are changing the planet in a way in which it will become mostly unhabitable for human beings, at least in 90% of the surface of the Earth in a period of maybe 100 or 200 years. The situation is so difficult that actually we have two very, very important risks. First, the risk of destroying our civilization as we understand it. And secondly, most importantly, we are producing the sixth mass extinction of species in the history of the planet. So Anthropocene is a new period, a new geological period, in which the influence of human beings can transform the biology and the geology of the planet. For example, the sea level can go up for about 60 meters in the next 2 or 3 centuries if we don't change basic things in our civilization, mostly carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions, and the way in which we understand growth. That so Earth is affected by a seemingly unrestricted expansion of the human economy, which is going to produce a planetary collapse. That's the idea of the Anthropocene schematically. And this is going to be shortly, I hope, approved by the World Academy of Geology to become officially recognized as a concept. It will happen probably in the next 5 or 10 years. Well, given that, I would like to ask you, how can you describe the influence of anthropocentrism in the way in which we see nature and the expansion of human activity, particularly after the Industrial Revolution?
I think that anthropocentrism is one of the pillars of the modern capitalist system, which has gained traction with the Industrial Revolution, right? In its invitation, as I said before, to subdue the rest of the world, it lays the foundation for the philosophy of utilitarianism, as framed by Jeremy Bentham, for example, profitability, and those again lay the foundation for a specific understanding of humans themselves, which Carpolani has framed as the Homo economicus. So this specific understanding of mankind is that we are self-centered individuals who always rationally seek to maximize their own benefit. And this Homo economicus is blind toward his interdependencies. He conceives himself as an unbound, totally independent, autonomous actor who has always to compete with others in order to prevail. And his well-being is grounded in accumulating material possessions, and he can never have enough of them. Yeah, I put that in masculine on purpose because I think there is some overlap between the anthropocentric and the androcentric worldviews here. Like for a long time, the economic actors were mainly men in the capitalist system, and women's labor was unpaid or then less paid, etc. But so the problem here is that this Homo economicus is also subject to a logic of permanent expansion, which you already mentioned, Carlos, before, which undergirds modern capitalism, like in the need for capital accumulation as a motor of the capitalist economy. We have that we always everything has to grow bigger, to get better, to which always to get more, to become more, to become to go farther, etc., etc., which is also something that pretty much shapes our subjectivities. Actually, it's not only out there; it's also in ourselves, because we are educated in that way. And I would say that especially since World War II, this imperative of economic growth has turned into a political priority also. And today it permeates political institutions as their primary goal. Yeah. And in the global south, that often translates into what is understood by development. It is often used in a synonymous way. So a country is supposedly developing when its GDP figures go up. Yeah. There are several problems with that. The first one is that GDP growth does not automatically translate into well-being, as the mainstream economic discourse and most big media always suggest. To the contrary, in societies which are structurally profoundly unequal, as is, for example, the case in most Latin American countries, growth can benefit only the elites, for example, or even transnational corporations which take on the benefits of economic activities abroad, instead of having positive impacts for the local population. So when economic activities are destructive, of livelihoods, of nature, of health, as is the case, for example, with many extractivist activities like large-scale mining or even small-scale mining, economic growth can even translate into worse living conditions for concrete people. So that is the first set of problems with that growth imperative. And the second set of problems is that modern capitalism is driven by this idea that economic growth has to go on forever. Yeah, it is illimited. There is never an enough, regardless of the fact that our planet is a limited living environment. So this is where that very important notion of planetary boundaries comes in again, because we are pushing economic growth further and further beyond those planetary boundaries, which is also called the ecological overshoot, yeah, damaging the ecosystemic conditions which are necessary for life as such to go on here on Earth. So this is a major problem with that notion of illimited economic growth and the underlying practices, of course. So even now, in the face of global warming, of loss of species, and of ecological breakdown, as we can see it very often in the news, capitalism still promotes so-called solutions, which still have to be profitable by all means. For example, it has to be a mega project logic, which is driven mainly by large corporations or those public corporate alliances, which are, being created more and more on a huge scale, regardless of the new ecosystemic imbalances that they might generate, because this is more profitable. Yeah. And there is an avoidance of attacking, for example, that centrality of economic growth in the search for solutions. Yeah. And for example, putting the conservation of the mere conditions of reproduction of life at the center, that would be the priority politics would need in our times. But to the contrary, for example, to make climate action profitable within this anthropocentric growth and profit-oriented logic, nature has to be redefined in terms of market value and also as a financial asset. So, for example, food is now traded at the stock exchange, which with its speculative value prevailing before its intrinsic value. So feeding people and animals in order to reproduce life becomes secondary, and making money by trading food as a commodity becomes priority. So if the price is not high enough, this leads to crops not being harvested at all or even being destroyed in order to create a new artificial scarcity on the market, instead of being distributed, that food, to those who urgently need it because they are hungry today, right? So this is what the financialization of nature is about. And I would say Anthropocentrism is closely interwoven with the centrality of profit in our present days, and it has doubtlessly exacerbated our destructive relations with nature. So, Carlos, to move on here, I would like to bring our conversation toward alternative paradigms, which we should look at in order to find real solutions. And some people have introduced biocentrism as an alternative paradigm to anthropocentrism. To you, what does this perspective entail? And how does it differ from anthropocentrism in terms of how we see nature and how we understand human well-being? And how is also biocentrism linked to the rights of nature?
Okay. Miriam, after your very detailed and interesting explanation about the notion of anthropocentrism and why it is linked with the structure of the current economic system and with our supposedly scientific understanding of the economy, I would like to say that we are approaching a very deep paradigmatic shift. Several decades ago, began to emerge a new conception of the relationship between human beings and nature. And can be generically called biocentrism. And the basic idea, which is a philosophical concept, is that human beings are, our species is mostly the result of evolution and cannot exist and cannot be sustained without supporting the basic process of evolution of life on Earth and the evolution of the planet itself, including non-living organisms such as rivers, mountains, water, oxygen, and so on. So we need to understand the presence of human beings on Earth as a result of an intrinsic evolution of the universe, of nature. And we cannot regard ourselves as the only one intelligent species with that kind of intrinsic superiority over nature and conceive nature as a thing that can be destroyed, appropriated, transformed, or even extinguished. That is why this notion, named as biocentrism, actually is based on a notion of equilibrium. An equilibrium between human civilization, not only individuals, but human society, current human society, and the intrinsic mechanism of existence and evolution of ecosystems. That means that we are facing a very deep change in the notion of value. The notion of value is strongly linked with the notion of rights. We value nature as well as we value ourselves as a part of nature. That is biocentrism. We cannot depart from a kind of intrinsic equilibrium between civil society or human society and the rest of nature, because we are part of nature. That is the change. So if we want to move forward in the future to a sustainable society, a key element for making it will be an equilibrium between ecosystem and human beings. That means that, for example, that we cannot pursue anymore this notion of unlimited and unrestricted economic growth as a goal, because this economic growth is destroying the equilibrium and destroying the capacity of this society linked with nature to survive. So the idea is to reshape the foundation of all social sciences and philosophy, putting nature again in the center of our system of values, and putting humankind as a part of nature, inside nature, uh, and putting the need of an equilibrium, which implies necessarily the maintaining and reinforcing of evolutionary processes in nature. That is essentially the paradigmatic shift that it is necessary. Is the only way of saving humanity as well. I think humanity has a world by itself, obviously, as a part of nature, but we need to preserve our future. We need to understand the rights, not only the rights of nature, but also the rights of incoming of new generations to have an habitable world to live in.
Thank you, Miriam and Carlos, for sharing your knowledge and perspectives with us in this episode. It's been an honour to have you on our podcast. With this, we conclude another revealing episode of Conversations with Mother Nature, in which we have explored a topic that transcends the barriers of time and culture, the transformation of our perspective. We invite you to rethink our relationship with nature and also to join us in an upcoming episode of our podcast, where we continue our conversations with Mother Earth. See you next time.